The summer of 1884 didn't arrive in Red Hollow. It invaded. Heat came down like punishment, baking the earth until it cracked open in jagged lines that looked like the land itself was trying to scream. Dust hung in the air thick enough to taste, coating teeth and lungs and the back of every throat in town. The sun sat overhead like something angry, something personal, beating down on wooden storefronts and dirt roads until even shadows seemed to sweat. Red Hollow wasn't much. A scatter of buildings pretending to be a town, really. A general store that doubled as the post office. A saloon that opened too early and closed too late. A church nobody attended except when someone died, which was often enough. Beyond that, just ranches spread out across land that fought you for every scrap of life you tried to pull from it. It was the kind of place people came to when they'd run out of other options. Eliza Hartwell knew that feeling intimately. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Henderson's general store, wheels groaning like they were relieved to finally quit moving. Dust exploded upward in a choking cloud. Eliza sat inside, hands gripping her worn leather suitcase so hard her knuckles had gone white an hour ago. She'd been holding on like that since Santa Fe, maybe longer. Through the small window, she could see people. Not many. Red Hollow didn't have many. But enough. A woman in a faded calico dress hurrying past with a basket. Two men standing outside the saloon watching, always watching. That's what men did in small towns. They watched and they talked, and they decided what you were worth before you'd even opened your mouth. Eliza took a breath that tasted like dust and copper pennies. You can do this. You've done harder things. That was a lie. But it was the kind of lie that sometimes got you through the next 5 minutes. The driver appeared at the door, an older man with a face like worn leather and eyes that had stopped caring about other people's business decades ago. Red Hollow, miss. End of the line. End of the line. That felt right. She stood, legs stiff from 12 hours of rattling over roads that barely deserved the name. Her dress was travel-stained, wrinkled beyond saving. She'd stopped caring about that somewhere around the third day. The suitcase felt heavier than it should have, but then again, running always made your baggage weigh more. Stepping down from the coach, her boots hit dirt that was hard as stone. The heat slammed into her immediately, different from the stuffy heat inside the coach. This was open, exposed, nowhere to hide from it. The sun found every inch of her, and so did the stairs. The two men outside the saloon had turned fully now, abandoning whatever conversation they'd been having. The woman with the basket had slowed, glancing back over her shoulder. Even the storekeeper had appeared in his doorway, wiping his hands on his apron, watching. Nobody smiled, nobody waved, nobody welcomed. Eliza kept her chin up, kept her face carefully blank. She'd learned early how to make herself look harder than she felt. It was a survival skill, like knowing which men to avoid in a crowded room or which alleys stayed dark enough to hide in. She scanned the small crowd for a face she wouldn't recognize, only knew from letters written in careful, measured handwriting. Letters that said almost nothing personal. Letters that offered a bargain she'd been desperate enough to accept. Rhett called her. He'd said he'd be here, said he'd meet the afternoon coach. Said, "Miss Hartwell." The voice came from her left, quiet but carrying weight. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. She turned, and there he was. Rhett Calder stood apart from the others, about 15 feet away, like he'd deliberately kept distance between himself and the rest of the town. He was tall, taller than she'd expected from letters, with shoulders that came from real work, not the kind of build men got from being naturally big. His clothes were work-worn, dark trousers, a shirt that had been washed too many times, a vest that had seen better years. No hat. His hair was dark, pushed back from his face, a little too long, with threads of early gray at the temples, despite him looking only about 35. But it was his face that made Eliza's breath catch, and not in the way foolish girls caught their breath over handsome men in dime novels. Rhett Calder had a face that had seen things, lived through things, maybe done things. It was weathered, lined at the corners of his eyes, with a jaw that looked like it knew how to stay shut. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, faded white against tanned skin. His eyes were dark, brown, maybe, though the harsh sunlight made it hard to tell, and they didn't linger. He looked at her just long enough to confirm her identity, then looked away, like he was giving her space on purpose. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Because Eliza had learned the hard way that the most dangerous men weren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they were the quiet ones, the ones who didn't need to prove anything, the ones who already knew what they were capable of. And she'd heard things about Rhett Calder. Whispers, really. Third-hand gossip from women in Santa Fe who claimed to know someone who'd come through Red Hollow once. Stories about a man who'd killed 3 men in a single night. Or maybe it was 5, depending on who was telling it. A man who'd been married once, or engaged, or something like that, and she'd left him. Run away. Some said she'd been scared, some said she'd been smart. Looking at him now, standing there with his hands hanging loose at his sides, not reaching for her, not crowding her, not even really looking at her, Eliza couldn't tell which version was true. Maybe all of them, maybe none. "Mr. Calder," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Another skill she'd learned: never let them hear you shake. He nodded once, then gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby, old but sturdy looking, with 2 horses that looked like they'd been bred for work, not speed. "Your trunk on top?" "No trunk, just this." She lifted the suitcase slightly. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or calculation, but it was gone before she could identify it. "That's all?" "That's all." He didn't ask why. Didn't question what kind of woman showed up to start a new life with a single suitcase. He just nodded again and turned toward the wagon. Eliza followed, very aware of the eyes still on them. The men at the saloon. The woman with the basket, who'd stopped pretending to move. Even the storekeeper leaning in his doorway like he was watching a show. Small towns. Everyone knew everyone's business, or wanted to. Rhett helped her up onto the wagon seat, not touching her directly, just offering a hand she could take or ignore, and then walked around to the other side. He moved with the kind of economy that came from bodies that had learned not to waste motion. Climbed up, took the reins, and clicked to the horses without a word. They pulled away from Henderson's store, from the staring eyes, from the cluster of buildings that called itself a town. The wagon wheels creaked. The horses' hooves raised small clouds of dust, and silence sat between them like a third passenger. Eliza watched the landscape roll past. Dry, harsh, endless. Hills in the distance, scrub brush clinging to life. Fences that marked out territories she didn't understand yet. Everything looked half dead, struggling, like the land itself was barely holding on. She understood that feeling too. After about 10 minutes, Rhett spoke without looking at her. "Ranch is about 40 minutes out. We'll get there before sundown." "All right." Another minute passed. "There's a room," he continued, still watching the road. "It's got a lock. On the inside." Eliza's hands tightened on her suitcase. He glanced at her then, briefly, and something in his expression was almost apologetic. "Thought you should know that. Before we get there." She didn't know what to say. "Thank you?" That seemed wrong. But the fact that he'd thought to tell her, thought that might matter. "I appreciate that," she finally said. He nodded and went quiet again. The silence stretched, but it didn't feel hostile. Just careful. Like both of them were measuring the other, trying to figure out what they'd gotten themselves into. Eliza had written to him 2 months ago, responding to an advertisement in a Santa Fe newspaper. It had been brief, almost clinical. Rancher seeking housekeeper and cook, room and board provided. Remote location. Must be willing to work. Correspondence only. R. Calder, Red Hollow. She'd written 3 drafts before sending one. Kept it simple. Didn't lie, but didn't tell the whole truth either. Said she could cook, which was true. Said she could keep house, which was also true. Said she was looking for steady work and a fresh start, which was the most honest thing she'd written in years. His reply had been equally sparse. Asked if she could handle isolation. Asked if she had references. She didn't. Not really, but she'd improvised. Asked if she understood the work would be hard. She'd said yes to everything, because the alternative was staying in Santa Fe, where Marcus would eventually find her, or going back east, where there was nothing left for her, or trying another city, another town, another failed attempt at disappearing. At least Red Hollow was nowhere. At least Rhett Calder, for all his dangerous reputation, had been honest enough to mention a room with a lock. That counted for something, didn't it? The ranch appeared gradually, emerging from the landscape like it had been there so long it had become part of the land itself. A house, single story, sprawling, built from wood that had weathered to gray. A barn that looked sturdier than the house. A couple of outbuildings, fences marking out pastures where a handful of cattle grazed. It wasn't impressive, but it wasn't falling apart either. It was the kind of place that demanded constant work just to stay standing. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down, moving around to offer her a hand again. This time she took it, briefly, and stepped down onto dirt that was slightly softer here, less baked. "I'll show you inside, Git," he said. The house was dim after the bright sunlight and cooler. Small windows kept out the worst of the heat. The main room was kitchen and sitting area combined. A stove, a rough table with 4 mismatched chairs, a couple of old armchairs near a cold fireplace. Everything was clean but worn, used but cared for. Rhett led her down a short hallway. 2 doors on the left, 1 on the right. He stopped at the first door on the left and pushed it open. The room was small, a bed with a simple frame and what looked like a handmade quilt, a dresser with 3 drawers, a small table with a basin and pitcher, a single window with faded curtains. Nothing fancy, but clean, ready, and on the inside of the door, a heavy iron bolt. "This is yours," Rhett said. "The dresser's empty. There's linens in the trunk at the foot of the bed. I'm across the hall." He pointed to the door on the right. Other doors just storage. Eliza stepped inside, still holding her suitcase. The room smelled like old wood and sunshine. Simple. Plain. Safe? She didn't know yet. Rhett lingered in the doorway but didn't enter. "I usually eat around sundown. You don't have to cook tonight. Got some things prepared already. Just settle in. Tomorrow I can show you around properly, explain what needs doing. All right?" He nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "Miss Hartwell." "Eliza," she interrupted. If they were going to live under the same roof, formality seemed pointless. "Eliza," he corrected, and the name sounded strange in his careful voice. "I want to be clear about something." He paused, choosing words like they cost money. "You're here to work. That's the arrangement. I need help running this place, and you need—" He stopped himself. "You need steady work. That's all this is. I'm not expecting anything else." The way he said it, blunt, almost awkward, made her believe him more than smooth words would have. "I understand," she said, "and that lock—" He gestured to the door. "You use it whenever you want. I won't take offense." There was something in his eyes then, something that looked almost like shame, not directed at her, directed at whatever made him think he needed to say these things. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. He nodded once more and left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, fading toward what she assumed was his room. Eliza stood alone in the small bedroom, suitcase still gripped in her hand, and finally let herself breathe. She was here. She'd made it. She was... what? Safe? She didn't know, couldn't know, not yet. But at least she was far away. At least Marcus wouldn't think to look for her in a nowhere town with a man who'd advertised for a housekeeper like he was buying livestock. At least she had a room with a lock. Eliza set her suitcase on the bed and opened it slowly. Everything she owned in the world. 3 dresses, 2 worn beyond saving, but she'd kept them anyway. Undergarments, a brush with missing bristles, a small tin that held the last of her savings, $11.30. A photograph she kept meaning to burn but couldn't, and at the very bottom, wrapped in an old scarf, a knife. Small, sharp, always within reach. She took it out, weighed it in her hand, then slipped it under the pillow, just in case. That first night, Eliza didn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, in the unfamiliar room, in the unfamiliar house, and listened. For footsteps, for door handles turning, for the sound of someone testing the lock. Rhett had given her dinner, cold chicken, bread, some kind of vegetable she didn't recognize, and they'd eaten in near silence. He asked her nothing personal, told her nothing personal, just mentioned practical things. The well was out back, water was good, the stove burned hot, careful with it. Chickens needed feeding at dawn, she'd find the feed in the barn. He ate quickly, cleaned his plate, and excused himself to check on something in the barn. He didn't come back before she went to her room. Now, in the darkness, Eliza stared at the ceiling and waited for disaster. It was a habit she'd developed over the past 3 years. Sleep made you vulnerable. Sleep meant you didn't see it coming. Somewhere around midnight, she heard movement in the house. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Her hand found the knife under her pillow. The footsteps came down the hallway, stopped outside her door. Eliza didn't breathe. Seconds passed. 10, 20. Then something soft hit the floor, a gentle thud, and the footsteps retreated. More silence. Eliza waited 5 full minutes before she moved. Slowly, carefully, she slid out of bed and crept to the door, pressed her ear against it, listened. Nothing. She checked the lock, still secure, then, against every instinct screaming at her not to, she slowly slid the bolt back and opened the door a crack. The hallway was dark, empty, but on the floor just outside her door, a blanket. Heavy. Wool. The kind that kept you warm when nights got cold. Eliza stared at it for a long moment, then looked down the hallway toward Rhett's closed door. He'd heard her moving around, must have known she couldn't sleep, and instead of knocking, instead of asking questions, instead of doing anything that might have frightened her more, he'd left her a blanket and walked away. Eliza picked it up slowly, brought it inside, and locked the door again. She sat on the bed holding the blanket, trying to understand what kind of man did that. The kind who knew what it was like to be afraid. Or the kind who knew how to make people think they shouldn't be. She didn't know, couldn't know. But for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, something inside her chest loosened, just slightly, just enough to let her breathe a little deeper. Maybe this could work. For a little while at least, until she had to run again. Morning arrived too early and too bright. Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains, disoriented for a moment about where she was. Then memory caught up. Red Hollow. Rhett Calder's ranch. The room with the lock. She'd eventually slept, sometime after 2. Not deeply, but enough. The knife was still under her pillow. The blanket was spread across the foot of the bed where she'd finally laid it, afraid to trust it too much. She dressed quickly in one of her better dresses, better being relative, and pulled her hair back into a simple bun. Washed her face with water from the pitcher, which was cold and shocking and exactly what she needed. When she emerged from her room, the house was quiet. Rhett's door was open, the room empty. He was up already then, working. The kitchen was exactly as they'd left it last night, except someone, Rhett, had banked the fire in the stove and left it ready to relight. Next to it sat a bowl of eggs, still faintly warm. Fresh eggs. From the chicken she was supposed to be feeding. He'd done her job for her, on her first morning. Eliza frowned at the eggs, not sure whether to be grateful or insulted. She'd been hired to work, after all, to earn her keep. If he was going to do everything himself, why bother hiring anyone? She lit the stove, it caught easily, just like he'd said, and started coffee. Strong, the way she'd learned people liked it out west. Then she scrambled the eggs with the last of the previous night's bread, toasted over the stovetop. It wasn't fancy, but it was ready when Rhett came back inside. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the food on the table, then at her. "You didn't have to. That's what you hired me for," Eliza said, keeping her tone neutral. "Isn't it?" Something shifted in his expression. Not offense exactly, more like acknowledgement. "Fair enough." He washed his hands at the basin by the door. There was a worn towel hanging on a nail, and sat down without ceremony. Ate without comment. The food disappeared quickly, efficiently, like eating was just another task to complete. Eliza poured herself coffee but didn't sit. Stood near the stove instead, watching him, trying to figure out the rules of this arrangement. After a few minutes, Rhett looked up. "You can sit, you know. I'm fine." "Suit yourself." He returned to his plate. More silence. The kind that felt deliberate, like he was giving her space to decide what she was comfortable with. When he finished, he stood and brought his plate to the basin. "I'll be working the fence line in the south pasture today. Post rotted through after the spring rains, whole sections coming down. Probably take me most of the day." "All right. You need anything? I'll be back around noon for water." "I can bring it to you," Eliza offered. "Save you the trip back." He paused, considering. "That'd be helpful. There's a canteen hanging in the barn next to the door. Fill it from the well." "All right." He grabbed his hat from a peg by the door. She hadn't seen it last night, and settled it on his head. Looked back at her once. "Chickens are already fed. You don't have to do everything today. Just get settled." Then he was gone. Screen door banging shut behind him, boots crunching on dirt as he headed toward the barn. Eliza stood in the quiet kitchen and tried to make sense of him. Most men she'd known fell into categories: the loud ones, who took up space and made sure you knew they were there; the violent ones, who turned everything into a demonstration of power; the weak ones, who pretended to be harmless until they weren't. Rhett didn't fit any of those. He was quiet, but not weak. Strong, but not violent. He took up space without demanding it, and he kept his distance like it was deliberate, like he'd decided that was safest. For her? Or for him? Eliza cleaned up from breakfast, taking stock of the kitchen as she worked. The pantry was better stocked than she'd expected. Flour, cornmeal, beans, coffee, sugar, salt. Some dried herbs she didn't recognize. A small barrel of salted pork. Root vegetables in a crate. Not luxury, but not bare bones either. The house itself was surprisingly clean for a man living alone. Dust-free. Organized. Nothing out of place. Like he ran the ranch the same way he seemed to run his life. Controlled, measured, careful. She found the broom and swept. Found rags and wiped down surfaces that didn't really need wiping. Checked the water pitcher. Filled it from the pump out back. Small tasks. Familiar tasks. Tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to places she didn't want it to go. Around mid-morning, she found the canteen Rhett had mentioned and filled it with cold well water. Then she set out toward the south pasture, following the fence line like he'd said. The land was different in daylight, still harsh, still dry, but with a strange beauty to it. The sky was impossibly big, stretching forever in every direction. The air smelled like dust and sage. Somewhere in the distance she could hear cattle lowing. She found Rhett about 20 minutes out, working on a section of fence where several posts had indeed rotted through. He'd already pulled 2 out and was digging a new post hole, sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening his shirt. He looked up as she approached, shading his eyes against the sun. "Water," Eliza said, holding up the canteen. He nodded, set down the post hole digger, and took it from her. Drank long and deep, then splashed some on his face before handing it back. "Thanks. How much longer?" "Few more hours, got 3 more posts to replace, then I can string new wire." Eliza looked at the work he'd done, the holes he'd dug, the posts he'd hauled out here, the new ones waiting to be set. Hard work, the kind that broke your back if you let it. "Need help?" The words were out before she'd thought them through. Rhett looked surprised. "You know anything about fencing?" "No, but I can learn." He studied her for a long moment, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd arrived, taking her measure. "It's rough work," he finally said. "Gets your hands torn up if you're not used to it." "I've had worse." Something in his expression shifted. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "All right, you can help me set the posts. I'll handle the wire. That part's tricky if you don't know what you're doing." They worked through the afternoon, Rhett showing her how to brace the posts while he tamped dirt around them, how to check if they were straight, how to pack the earth tight so the whole thing wouldn't shift in wind. He didn't talk much while he worked, but his instructions were clear, patient. He never made her feel stupid for not knowing something, and he never got too close. Always maintained space between them, always let her decide where to stand. By the time they finished, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked almost violent. Eliza's hands were dirty, her dress was dusty, and she was tired in a way she hadn't been in months. The good kind of tired, the kind that came from actual work, not from running. They walked back to the house together, not speaking much. Rhett carried the tools, Eliza carried the empty canteen. "You did good work today," Rhett said as they reached the house. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, then just nodded and headed to the barn to put the tools away. Eliza went inside and started dinner. Days passed like that, slowly, carefully. Rhett worked. Eliza cooked, cleaned, learned the rhythms of the ranch. They spoke when necessary, shared meals in comfortable silence, existed beside each other without collision. It was strange, unfamiliar. She kept waiting for something to break, for him to reveal whatever darkness everyone whispered about, for him to demand more than they'd agreed to. He never did. Instead, small things kept appearing. A cup of coffee left on the kitchen table in the morning while she was still getting dressed, always the right temperature, always ready. Wildflowers, planted in rough rows behind the shed, She'd mentioned once, just once in passing, that her mother used to grow them. Didn't think he'd been listening. But a week later, there they were. Not fancy, not arranged with any skill, just there. When she asked him about it, he shrugged. Had some seeds. Seemed ashamed to waste them. But Eliza knew wildflower seeds didn't just appear. He'd gotten them from somewhere. Had planted them deliberately, for her. And he acted like it was nothing. That unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Because she knew how to handle cruelty. Knew how to survive it, fight it, run from it. Kindness? Kindness without expectation? She had no defense against that. One afternoon, she was in town picking up supplies. Rhett had sent her with money and a list, told her to take the wagon, told her where to go, when she overheard two women talking outside the general store. Still don't understand what he's thinking, bringing a woman out there. Maybe he's lonely, been alone since Catherine left. Or maybe he learned his lesson. You really believe that after what happened? I don't know what to believe. But that poor girl he's got out there now, she has no idea what she's walked into. Eliza had kept walking, pretending she hadn't heard, but the word stuck with her. Catherine. That was a name. The woman from the stories. The one who'd left. What happened? Whatever that meant. She didn't ask Rhett about it, partly because it wasn't her business, partly because she knew how it felt to have a past you didn't want to explain. But it lodged in her mind, a splinter she couldn't remove. That night, Rhett came back late from checking on something in the north pasture. When he walked through the door, Eliza saw blood seeping through his shirt, dark and wet. "You're hurt," she said, standing up from the table where she'd been waiting. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Sit down." He looked like he was going to argue, then thought better of it. Sat. Eliza went to the basin, heated water, found clean rags. When she came back, Rhett had his shirt off, revealing the wound, a deep gash along his ribs, like something with claws had gotten him. "What did this?" she asked, cleaning away the blood. "Barbed wire. Got careless." It didn't look like barbed wire. Looked worse than that. But she didn't push. She cleaned the wound carefully, her hand steady despite how close she was to him. Despite the fact that this was the first time she'd really touched him. His skin was warm, solid, real. He didn't flinch. Just sat there, jaw tight, letting her work. "This is going to need stitches," Eliza said quietly. "I'll manage." "You'll get infected and die." "Hold still." She'd stitched wounds before, had learned out of necessity, back when there was no one else to do it. Her hands remembered the motions even if she wished they didn't. Rhett watched her work, something unreadable in his expression. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he finally asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I guess it doesn't." She tied off the thread, cut it, and bandaged the wound with clean cloth. "There. Try not to rip it open again." "I'll do my best." They sat there for a moment, the evening light fading through the windows, neither of them moving. Then Rhett spoke, his voice lower than usual. "I wasn't always like this." Eliza looked up at him. "The quiet," he clarified. "The careful. I used to be different, louder. Angrier." He paused, choosing words. "I did things I'm not proud of. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. Almost became something I couldn't come back from." "What stopped you?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Someone left. Someone who should have stayed. And I realized..." He stopped, swallowed. "I realized she was right to go. That if I kept going the way I was going, I'd end up alone, or dead, or worse. So you changed." "I'm trying to." He looked at her directly then, and she saw something raw in his eyes. Something honest. "Every day I wake up and I try to be better than the man I was yesterday. Some days I manage it, some days I don't." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, to someone voluntarily exposing their own damage like it was just a fact. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because you're going to hear stories about me, about things I've done. And I wanted you to hear the truth from me first." He paused. "I'm not dangerous to you, Eliza. I won't ever hurt you. But I understand if you don't believe that. If you want to leave, I'll pay your way back to Santa Fe. No questions asked." She stared at him. At this man who'd just offered her an escape route, who was giving her permission to be afraid of him. And something inside her, something that had been closed so tightly for so long, cracked open just a little. "I'm not leaving," she heard herself say. Rhett looked surprised. "You're not?" "No." She stood, started gathering the bloody rags. "I took this job. I intend to keep it." That wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was more complicated. The whole truth was that she'd just watched a man confess his own violence and then immediately offer her freedom from it. The whole truth was that she'd spent the last 3 weeks waiting for him to turn into the kind of man she'd learned to expect, and he kept stubbornly refusing to do it. The whole truth was that Eliza Hartwell, who'd spent years trusting no one, was starting to think maybe, just maybe, Rhett Calder might be different. And that terrified her more than any scar or story ever could, because trust was the most dangerous thing in the world. It was the thing that destroyed you when it broke. The weeks that followed moved differently than Eliza expected. Not faster, exactly. Not easier. Just different. She'd grown accustomed to waiting for disaster. 3 years of running had taught her that peace was always temporary, that safety was an illusion people told themselves before everything fell apart. But at the ranch, days accumulated into weeks without catastrophe, without violence, without the inevitable moment when a man's patience ran out and his true nature surfaced. Rhett remained frustratingly consistent. He worked from dawn until the light failed, fixed things that broke, tended animals that needed tending, spoke only when necessary, and never about anything that mattered. He ate what she cooked without complaint, thanked her for things he didn't need to thank her for, and kept his distance like it was a religion he practiced daily. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Eliza suspicious, because in her experience, men who worked that hard at appearing harmless were usually hiding something. The question was whether they were hiding it from you or from themselves. She still locked her door every night, still kept the knife under her pillow, still woke at the smallest sound, heart hammering, hands reaching for a weapon before her mind fully surfaced from sleep. But she also found herself relaxing in small ways she hadn't anticipated. The coffee he left her each morning stopped feeling like an intrusion and started feeling like consideration. The wildflowers behind the shed had begun to bloom, scraggly, imperfect things that fought for life in the hard soil. She watered them when she remembered, sometimes caught herself smiling at them when she didn't think anyone was watching. And Rhett, despite his careful distance, had started to become less of a stranger and more of a presence. Not quite a friend. Definitely not anything more. Just someone who existed in the same space, following the same rhythms, building something that almost resembled trust through nothing more than repetition and reliability. It was the kind of thing that could make a person forget to stay vigilant. That was dangerous. One morning in late August, Eliza was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. The sound was different from Rhett's usual comings and goings, louder, faster, carrying an energy that made her stomach clench. She moved to the window and saw 3 riders coming up the road toward the house. Men she didn't recognize. One of them was laughing about something, the sound carrying across the morning air like broken glass. Rhett emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He'd seen them too. His body language changed instantly. Not quite aggressive, but alert. Ready. Eliza watched as the riders pulled up near him. The one in front, a heavy-set man with a beard that needed trimming, leaned forward in his saddle. "Calder, been a while." Rhett's voice was flat. "Burke, heard you got yourself some help around here?" Burke's eyes scanned the property, landing on the house, on the window where Eliza stood. His grin widened. "That true? I hired a housekeeper. Not your concern." "Housekeeper?" Burke laughed, and the other 2 joined in. "That what you're calling it now?" Eliza saw Rhett's jaw tighten, saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. But when he spoke, his voice remained level, controlled. "State your business or get off my land." Burke's smile faded. "Now that's not very neighborly." "We're not neighbors. Your place is 8 miles north. This is 8 miles too close." The tension stretched taut enough to snap. Eliza's hand found the kitchen knife she'd been using to slice bread. Her heart was beating too fast, her breath too shallow. She recognized this energy, had lived through it before. This was the moment before violence, when men decided whether words were enough or if they needed to prove something with their fists. One of Burke's companions, a younger man with a scar across his chin, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Heard you went soft, Calder. Guess they were right." Rhett didn't respond, just stood there, waiting. Burke studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. We're heading into town. Wanted to let you know there's been some trouble with rustlers. Lost 6 head last month. Sheriff's not doing anything about it, so some of us are planning to handle it ourselves. Not interested. Didn't ask if you were interested. Just giving you the courtesy of a warning. If we catch anyone on our land who shouldn't be there, we're not asking questions first. Then make sure you know whose land you're on before you start shooting. Burke's expression darkened. You threatening me? Just stating facts. The standoff held for another few seconds, then Burke pulled his horse's head around. You've changed, Calder. Not sure if it's for the better. He glanced at the house again, at the window where Eliza still stood. Be careful. Woman like that, living out here with a man like you, people talk. Let them. Burke laughed again, but there was no humor in it. He kicked his horse forward, and the 3 riders moved off, heading toward the road that led to town. Their laughter drifted back, ugly and deliberate. Rhett stood watching them go until they disappeared from sight. Then he turned back toward the house, and Eliza saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, exactly. More like exhaustion. The kind that came from holding yourself back when every instinct screamed to do otherwise. She moved away from the window before he could see her watching. When he came inside a few minutes later, his expression was carefully neutral again. Back under control. Sorry about that, he said, hanging his hat on the peg. Burke's always been an ass. Who was he? Eliza asked, keeping her voice level. Runs a spread north of here. We've had disagreements. Rhett moved to the basin and washed his hands, scrubbing harder than necessary. He's the type who thinks might makes right. Likes to throw his weight around. He mentioned rustlers. There's always rustlers. Or stories about rustlers. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. He dried his hands, still not looking at her. He was trying to rile me up, get me involved in whatever vigilante nonsense he's planning. Why? Because that's what I used to do, before. He finally met her eyes. I used to be the first one to ride out when there was trouble. First one to throw a punch. First one to... He stopped himself. I was useful to men like Burke back then. Now I'm not. That bothers him. Eliza set the knife down carefully. What did he mean about people talking? Rhett's jaw worked. Small towns, small minds. Woman living alone with a man she's not married to. That's scandal enough to keep folks entertained for months. Does it bother you, what they say? He looked at her for a long moment. Does it bother you? I asked first. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first genuine one she'd seen from him in weeks. Fair enough. No, it doesn't bother me. I stopped caring what people in Red Hollow thought about me a long time ago. Then it doesn't bother me either. They stood there in the kitchen, the morning light filtering through windows that needed cleaning, and something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the foundation for it. An understanding that they were both people who'd learned to stop caring about the opinions of those who didn't matter. Rhett moved to the table and sat down heavily. Breakfast ready? Almost. Good. I'm starving. And just like that, the moment passed. They fell back into their familiar rhythm. Her cooking, him eating, both of them existing in companionable silence. But something had changed anyway. Something small but undeniable. Eliza had seen how Rhett handled confrontation, had watched him choose restraint over aggression, had seen the effort it cost him, and instead of making her more afraid, it made her less. Because anyone could be violent. That was easy. Choosing not to be when you had every reason and ability, that was harder. That counted for something. The following week brought a heat wave that made the previous week seem mild. The sun turned vicious, beating down until even the air felt solid. The land baked. Water levels in the well dropped. Animals moved slowly, conserving energy, finding shade wherever they could. Rhett worked shorter days, starting earlier and stopping by mid-afternoon when the heat became dangerous. Eliza adjusted too, cooking in the morning before the kitchen became unbearable, doing laundry in the coolest part of the day, finding any excuse to stay out of direct sunlight. One afternoon, desperate for relief, she walked down to the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. It was barely more than a trickle this time of year, but it was water and it was cooler than the house. She'd been there about 20 minutes, sitting on a flat rock with her bare feet in the water, dress hiked up to her knees when she heard footsteps. She turned quickly, heart jumping, old habits dying hard, and saw Rhett approaching through the trees. "Sorry," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Didn't mean to startle you. Heard someone down here, wanted to make sure it wasn't—" He trailed off. Wasn't what? Anyone who shouldn't be here. Rustlers. He meant rustlers. Or Burke's men. Or any number of dangers that existed for women alone in isolated places. "Just me," Eliza said. Rhett nodded, started to turn away, then hesitated. "Mind if I join you? Just for a minute. It's hot as hell up at the house." Eliza considered. This was the first time he'd sought out her company rather than just tolerating it. The first time he'd asked for something that wasn't related to work or necessity. "All right," she said. He sat on another rock a few feet away and pulled off his boots, rolled up his pant legs and stuck his feet in the water with a sigh that was almost embarrassing in its relief. "Jesus, that's good." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint gurgle of the creek, the buzz of insects in the heat-drunk afternoon. It should have been awkward, should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt almost normal. "You ever think about leaving?" Rhett asked suddenly. Eliza looked at him. "The ranch?" "Red Hollow, this whole area, going somewhere that isn't trying to kill you 6 months out of the year." "Every day," Eliza admitted. "But where would I go?" "Anywhere. City, maybe. Place with people and opportunities and actual weather instead of just variations on torture." "You sound like you've thought about it." "I have." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. "Before I bought the ranch, I spent 2 years drifting, worked in San Francisco for a while, Denver, even spent a winter in Chicago." "What brought you back here?" Rhett was quiet for a moment. "Got tired of running." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza felt them land in her chest like stones. "Is that what you were doing?" she asked quietly. "Running?" "Yeah, for myself mostly. From what I'd done, who I'd been." He glanced at her. "Turns out you can't actually outrun yourself. You just end up in new places with the same problems. So you came back." "So I came back, bought this worthless piece of land and decided if I was going to be miserable, I might as well be miserable somewhere I understood." "Are you? Miserable?" He considered the question seriously. "Less than I was. Ranch gives you something to focus on. Physical work helps. There's a clarity to it. You fix a fence or you don't, you feed the animals or they die. Simple." "Doesn't sound simple. Simpler than people, anyway." He looked at her directly then. "Why'd you come here, Eliza? Really?" She'd been waiting for this question since she arrived, had prepared deflections, half-truths, plausible lies. But sitting there by the creek, feet in cool water, with a man who'd just admitted to running from himself, the truth felt easier than fiction. "I was running too," she said. "From what?" "Someone. A man." She watched her toes move in the current. "His name was Marcus. For a while I thought he was going to marry me. Asked him to, actually. He said yes." Rhett stayed quiet, giving her space to continue or stop. "Then things changed. He changed. Or maybe he was always like that and I just didn't see it until it was too late. He got possessive, controlling, started telling me where I could go, who I could see. Then he started—" She swallowed. "He hurt me. More than once." "Did you report him?" Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. "To who? The sheriff who drank with him every Friday? The judge who was his second cousin? Marcus's family had money and connections. I had nothing. So you left." "So I left. First to Denver, but he found me. Then Kansas City. He found me there too. He had people looking, you see. Paid them to track me down. Every time I thought I'd gotten far enough away, he'd show up. Never violent in public, of course. Always careful. Always controlled. Just enough to let me know he could reach me whenever he wanted." "That why you came all the way out here, to a place he'd never think to look?" "That was the hope." Eliza pulled her feet from the water and hugged her knees. "I saw your advertisement and thought maybe if I went somewhere remote enough, somewhere no one would care about a housekeeper with no references and a past she didn't want to explain, maybe he'd give up. Maybe he'd decide I wasn't worth the effort." "Do you believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." Rhett picked up another stone, turned it over in his hands. "This Marcus, he ever kill anyone?" The question surprised her. "No, I don't think so. Why?" Because I have. 3 men, different circumstances, different reasons, all justified, or so I told myself at the time. But that doesn't change the fact that I know what it's like to cross that line. He met her eyes. If he shows up here, if he tries to hurt you, I won't hesitate. I need you to know that. Eliza's breath caught. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. You're working for me, living under my roof. That makes you my responsibility. More than that, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You deserve to feel safe, maybe for the first time in years, and I can give you that at least, even if I can't give you much else. Something in Eliza's chest cracked open wider. This man, this careful, damaged man who kept his distance and spoke in measured tones and worked himself half to death just to avoid being alone with his thoughts. He'd just promised to kill for her, not to own her, not to control her, to protect her. There was a difference, a massive one. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. They sat by the creek until the sun started its descent, talking in fragments about nothing important. The weather, the cattle, small repairs that needed doing, surface things that felt deeper because of what they'd already shared. When they finally headed back to the house, walking side by side in the evening light, Eliza realized she'd forgotten to be afraid. For an entire afternoon, she'd just existed with someone else, without constantly calculating exits and weapons and worst-case scenarios. It felt strange. It felt good. It felt dangerous in a completely different way than she was used to. The next morning, Eliza woke to find Rhett already gone and a note on the kitchen table, scrawled in his careful handwriting. Going to town for supplies. Back by afternoon. List on the counter if you think of anything else we need. R. She read it twice, then moved to the counter where he'd left a more detailed list. Salt, coffee, flour, nails, and a dozen other necessities. At the bottom, he'd added, something nice for yourself. Your choice. Eliza stared at the last line for a long time. Something nice for herself. When was the last time anyone had suggested that? When was the last time she'd had the luxury of wanting something just because it made her happy rather than because it helped her survive? She tried to think of what she might ask for and came up blank. Her needs had been so basic for so long, food, shelter, safety, that the idea of nice felt foreign, frivolous, but also tempting. She spent the morning doing laundry, hauling water from the well, and heating it on the stove, scrubbing clothes against the washboard until her knuckles were raw. It was hard work, mindless work, the kind that let her thoughts wander. She thought about Rhett, about the way he'd sat by the creek yesterday, vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely allowed himself to be. About the promise he'd made, casual and absolute at the same time. She thought about Marcus, who'd made promises too. Different promises. The kind that sounded beautiful until you realized they were cages wrapped in pretty words. The difference, Eliza was beginning to understand, wasn't in the promises themselves. It was in the freedom that came with them. Marcus's promises had been about control. I promise to take care of you, which meant you're mine now. Rhett's promise had been about autonomy. I promise to protect you, which meant you're still yourself. One tried to make you smaller, the other gave you room to breathe. She was hanging wet clothes on the line behind the house when she heard horses again. Her body tensed automatically, hands freezing on the shirt she'd just pinned up. But it was just Rhett, returning earlier than expected. The wagon was loaded with supplies, and he wasn't alone. There was a woman sitting next to him on the wagon seat. Young, maybe early 20s, with blonde hair pinned up carefully, and a dress that was too nice for Red Hollow. Pretty in that deliberate way that took effort and money. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. The wagon pulled to a stop near the house, and Rhett jumped down, then turned to help the woman descend. She took his hand with a smile that showed too many teeth. Eliza, Rhett called, come meet Margaret Henderson. Her father owns the general store in town. Eliza walked over slowly, wiping her damp hands on her apron. Up close, Margaret was even prettier. Delicate features, flawless skin, the kind of beauty that made other women feel inadequate just by existing. Miss Hartwell, Margaret said, extending a gloved hand. I've heard so much about you. The handshake was brief, perfunctory. Margaret's eyes swept over Eliza in quick assessment, taking in the worn dress, the damp apron, the rough hands. categorizing, dismissing. Mr. Calder was kind enough to give me a ride home, Margaret continued. My horse threw a shoe, and I was stranded in town. Such a gentleman. Rhett was already unloading supplies from the wagon, deliberately not looking at either of them. It was on my way. Still, very thoughtful. Margaret turned her attention back to Eliza. You've been here how long now? A month? 5 weeks. And how are you finding it? Ranch life must be quite an adjustment for someone from… She paused delicately. Where did Mr. Calder say you were from? He didn't, Eliza said flatly. Margaret's smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. Of course. Well, I'm sure you're managing just fine. Though it must be lonely out here. Not much company, not much society. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. You're not one of us. You're just the help. I manage, Eliza said. I'm sure you do. Margaret turned back to Rhett, who was pretending to be very focused on a sack of flour. Mr. Calder, you really must come to the church social next month. Everyone will be there. It's been so long since you've attended any town functions. I'm not much for socials. Oh, but you should make an exception. People miss seeing you. Her voice dropped into something that was probably supposed to sound concerned. They worry, you know, about you being out here alone. Well, not alone anymore, but… She glanced at Eliza. You know what I mean? Rhett straightened, a sack of flour over his shoulder. Tell your father thanks for the supplies. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Margaret's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. Of course. And think about the social. It really would be lovely to see you there. She gathered her skirts and walked toward a horse tied near the barn. Apparently it hadn't thrown a shoe after all, and mounted with practiced ease. With a final wave, she rode off, back toward town, her posture perfect even in the saddle. Eliza and Rhett stood in silence until she disappeared from sight. Sorry about that, Rhett muttered, carrying the flour into the house. Eliza followed him. Is she always like that? Like what? Sweet as sugar with a knife behind her back. Rhett actually laughed, a short bark of surprised amusement. Yeah, pretty much. Margaret's been trying to… He stopped, set the flour on the counter with more force than necessary. Her father wants her married to someone with land. I have land. She's determined. It's been going on for 2 years. And you're not interested? Not even a little bit. He started unpacking other supplies. She's exactly the kind of person I moved out here to avoid. All surface, all performance. No substance underneath. Eliza felt the knot in her stomach loosen slightly. She implied some things about me being here. She implies things about everyone. It's how she entertains herself. Rhett pulled out a small wrapped package and held it toward her. Here, for you. What is it? The something nice. Open it. Eliza unwrapped the brown paper carefully and found fabric inside, soft, dark blue cotton. Good quality. Enough for a dress. I noticed your dresses are pretty worn, Rhett said, suddenly awkward. Thought you might like something new. There's a seamstress in town, but I figured you'd rather make it yourself. If you know how. If you don't, I can… I know how, Eliza interrupted softly. She ran her fingers over the fabric, touched by the gesture in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Thank you. You didn't have to. Wanted to. They stood there in the kitchen, the afternoon light slanting through windows, a piece of blue fabric between them representing something neither of them knew how to name. Rhett, Eliza started, then stopped. What was she going to say? That she was starting to feel things she'd sworn she'd never feel again? That the careful distance they'd maintained was starting to hurt more than it helped? That she was terrified and grateful in equal measure? Yeah, he prompted. Nothing, just thank you for the fabric, for all of it. He nodded, and for a moment their eyes met, really met, and Eliza saw something there that made her breath catch. Not desire, exactly. Something deeper. Something like recognition. Like he saw her, really saw her, and wasn't scared of what he found. Then the moment passed. Rhett went back to unpacking supplies, and Eliza went back to her laundry, and they both pretended something hadn't just shifted between them. But it had, and they both knew it. That night, lying in her room with the door locked out of habit rather than fear, Eliza held the blue fabric and tried to remember the last time someone had given her something without expecting something in return. She couldn't, which meant either Rhett was different than every other man she'd known, or she was a fool for starting to believe he might be. The smart money was on fool, but Eliza had stopped being smart the moment she'd decided not to run from Red Hollow. Stopped being smart the moment she'd started watering wildflowers she didn't plant. Stopped being smart the moment she'd begun to think that maybe, just maybe, safety wasn't the same thing as survival. And that maybe, terrifyingly, dangerously, impossibly, she wanted more than just surviving. Outside her window, the night was huge and dark and filled with sounds she was finally learning not to fear. Somewhere in the house, Rhett was probably lying awake too, thinking his own careful thoughts, keeping his own careful distance. But the distance was getting smaller, and that scared Eliza more than Marcus ever had, because Marcus had been easy to hate. Rhett was becoming dangerously easy to trust, and trust, as Eliza knew too well, was the thing that destroyed you when it broke. She just had to hope that this time, for the first time in her life, it wouldn't. September arrived with cooler mornings and the first hints that summer might eventually surrender. The heat still came hard in the afternoons, but the nights carried a different quality now, almost comfortable, almost forgiving. The land itself seemed to exhale, releasing some of the tension it had held for months. Eliza finished the blue dress in 3 evenings, working by lamplight after the day's chores were done. Her stitches weren't perfect. There were places where the seams puckered slightly, where her tired hands had gotten sloppy, but it fit well enough and it was hers. New, clean, something that didn't carry the weight of everywhere she'd been before. She wore it for the first time on a Sunday morning, coming into the kitchen to find Rhett already at the table with coffee. He looked up, and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation, before he caught himself and looked back down at his cup. "New dress looks good," he said to the coffee. "Thank you for the fabric." "You did the work." They fell into their usual morning silence, but it felt different somehow, charged, like the air before a storm when everything gets heavy and expectant. Eliza poured herself coffee and stood by the stove, watching him covertly. He'd shaved recently. There was a small nick on his jaw that hadn't been there yesterday. His hair was damp, like he'd washed it. Small things. Things that didn't mean anything, except maybe they did. "I was thinking," Rhett said suddenly, "there's a box of books in the storage room, left over from—" He stopped. "From before. If you want to look through them. Most are probably dusty as hell, but some might be worth reading. I'd like that. I'll bring them out later." Another pause. Then Eliza asked the question that had been sitting in her throat for weeks. Who was Catherine? Rhett's hand froze halfway to his cup. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he set his hand down flat on the table and looked at her directly. "Where'd you hear that name?" "Town. Women talking. They mentioned her when I was getting supplies." Eliza kept her voice neutral. "Said she left. Said something happened." Rhett pushed back from the table and walked to the window, staring out at land he probably wasn't really seeing. His shoulders were tense, his jaw working like he was chewing words before he spit them out. "Catherine was my fiancée," he finally said. 4 years ago. We were going to get married, had the date set and everything." "What happened?" "I happened." He turned to face her and his expression was raw, unguarded. "I was different then. Angrier. Drank too much, fought too much, thought I could solve every problem with my fists. Catherine tried to help, tried to change me. But you can't change someone who doesn't want to be changed." "Did you hurt her?" "Not physically, never that. But I scared her. Saw it in her eyes one night after I came home from a fight in town. Busted knuckles, blood on my shirt that wasn't mine. She looked at me like I was something dangerous. Something she didn't recognize." He swallowed hard. 3 days later she was gone. Left a note saying she couldn't marry a man who was going to get himself killed or locked up within the year. Said she loved me, but she loved herself more. She was smart. She was right. Rhett rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't see it then. Spent months being angry about it, feeling betrayed like she'd given up on me. Took me almost a year to realize she'd done the only sane thing. I was becoming someone I shouldn't be. She saw it before I did." "Is that when you changed?" "That's when I started trying to. Doesn't happen overnight. Still trying, most days." He looked at her with something like vulnerability. That's why people like Burke think I've gone soft. Why Margaret keeps circling like a vulture. They see someone different than who I was, and they don't know what to make of it. Eliza set down her coffee cup carefully. I think you're better now than you were. You didn't know me then. No, but I know men like who you were. I know what they're capable of. And you're not that. Not anymore. Rhett studied her face for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, softened. Thank you for that. The moment stretched between them, fragile and honest. Then Rhett grabbed his hat from the peg and headed for the door, breaking whatever spell had been building. Gotta check the north fence, be back by noon. And he was gone, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and the ghost of a woman named Catherine, who'd been smart enough to leave before it was too late. The question Eliza couldn't answer was whether she was being equally smart by staying. That afternoon, while Rhett was still working somewhere out on the property, Eliza heard a wagon approaching. She tensed automatically but relaxed when she saw it was just old Henderson from the general store, Margaret's father, making a delivery. He pulled up near the house and climbed down with the careful movements of a man whose joints didn't work like they used to. Afternoon, Miss Hartwell. Got a package here for Calder. Came in on yesterday's stage. I'll take it. Thank you. Henderson handed her a wooden crate, not large but heavy enough to be awkward. Also wanted to apologize for my daughter. Margaret mentioned she rode out here last week. Said some things maybe she shouldn't have. Eliza was surprised by the directness. It's fine. No, it ain't. Margaret's got ideas about how things should be, and she don't always have the sense to keep them to herself. He scratched his beard. She means well, mostly. Just doesn't understand that not everyone wants what she thinks they should want. Like your land? Henderson barked a laugh. That obvious, huh? Yeah, I got more than enough land, don't need Calders, but Margaret's got it in her head that she needs to marry someone with property, someone respectable. Thinks it'll make her important. He shook his head. I keep telling her importance don't come from who you marry, but she's young, thinks she knows everything. She'll learn, maybe. Or maybe she'll end up bitter like half the women in Red Hollow who married for the wrong reasons. He climbed back onto his wagon. You tell Calder I said hello. And you take care of yourself, Miss Hartwell. You're doing good work out here. Don't let anyone tell you different. He drove off before Eliza could respond, leaving her standing there with the crate and a strange warmth in her chest. It was the first time anyone in town had said something kind to her directly. The first time someone had acknowledged her as more than just the subject of gossip. It mattered more than she wanted to admit. She brought the crate inside and set it on the table. Curiosity got the better of her. The lid wasn't nailed shut, just wedged tight, and she pried it open. Inside were books, 6 of them, carefully wrapped in brown paper. New books, with fresh bindings and clean pages, and tucked between them a note in unfamiliar handwriting. Rhett, thought you might appreciate these. You always did like the poets, even when you pretended not to. Hope the ranch is treating you well. Samuel. Eliza stared at the note, then at the books. This Samuel person knew Rhett well enough to know what he liked to read. Well enough to send expensive books across however many miles. Someone from his past, clearly. Someone who still cared. She rewrapped the books carefully and closed the crate, feeling like she'd intruded on something private. But the glimpse it gave her into Rhett's life before, into the man he'd been when he had friends who sent him poetry, made him feel more real somehow, more complete. When Rhett came back that evening, dusty and tired, she pointed to the crate. Henderson brought this. Said it came in on yesterday's stage. Rhett's eyebrows rose. He opened the crate, saw the books, and something complicated crossed his face. He read the note and was quiet for a long moment. Samuel was my best friend, before everything went to hell. He's the one who told me I needed to leave town, get my head straight. Haven't seen him in 3 years. He still cares about you. Yeah. Rhett ran his thumb over one of the book spines. Yeah, I guess he does. He set one book aside and put the rest back in the crate. The one he kept was slim, leather-bound. He held it for a moment like he was deciding something, then held it out to Eliza. Here, you wanted something to read. She took it carefully. The title was embossed in gold, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. I've never heard of this. It's good? Honest? About as far from flowery bullshit as poetry gets. He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward again. There's a poem in there. About a third of the way through. A woman waits for me. You might like it, or hate it. Hard to tell with Whitman. Thank you. That night, after dinner and dishes and all the small rituals that marked their evenings, Eliza took the book to her room. She lit the lamp and found the poem Rhett had mentioned. She read it once, quickly, then again, slowly. It was strange, bold, unflinching in ways that made her uncomfortable and fascinated in equal measure. It was about desire, yes, but also about equality. About women who contained the same strength and complexity as men. About partnership that didn't require surrender. She wondered why Rhett had pointed her to this specific poem. What he was trying to say without saying it. Or maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe he just thought she'd like poetry. But she didn't think so. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that was starting to feel dangerously like contentment. Work during the day, meals together morning and evening, quiet conversations that revealed small pieces of who they each were underneath all the careful armor they wore. Eliza learned that Rhett had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. That he liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint. That he was surprisingly well-read for a man who lived alone on a failing ranch. That he had nightmares sometimes. She could hear him moving around in the middle of the night, probably checking doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. She understood that impulse intimately. Rhett learned that Eliza could swear like a sailor when she burned herself on the stove. That she had a good head for numbers and had started keeping better records of ranch expenses than he'd ever managed. That she hummed while she worked, usually songs she didn't realize she was humming. That she still locked her door every night, but the bolt slid easier now, like the habit was fading. They learned each other in increments, in moments, in the accumulated weight of shared days. And then on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, everything broke. Eliza was in town alone. Rhett had given her money and the wagon, told her to pick up supplies and maybe treat herself to lunch at the boarding house. It was the first time he'd explicitly encouraged her to spend time away from the ranch, and she'd been grateful for it. The trip had been pleasant. Henderson had been friendly, even gave her a discount on fabric she hadn't asked for. The woman who ran the boarding house had served her lunch and made small talk that felt genuine rather than probing. For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Eliza had felt almost normal, almost like she belonged somewhere. She was loading the last of the supplies into the wagon, parked outside Henderson's store, when she heard a voice that turned her blood to ice.
Well, well, Eliza Hartwell, you've been hard to find.
She turned slowly, knowing what she'd see. Who she'd see. Marcus stood 5 feet away, leaning against a hitching post like he had all the time in the world. He looked exactly the same, tall, well-dressed, handsome in a way that had once made her heart race for all the wrong reasons. His smile was the same too, the one that looked charming to everyone else and predatory to her. "Nothing to say?" Marcus asked, pushing off the post and taking a step closer. "I've been looking for you for 6 months. Spent a lot of money tracking you down. Least you could do is say hello." Eliza's mouth was dry. Her hands were shaking. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt locked in place. "How did you find me?" Her voice came out thin, reedy. "I'm resourceful. You know that." He took another step. "Heard about a woman matching your description who'd taken a position on some nowhere ranch outside Red Hollow. Figured it was worth checking out. And here you are." "You need to leave." Marcus laughed. "Leave? Eliza, darling, I've come all this way. We have so much to discuss. Like why you ran away without even leaving a note. Like what you've been doing out here, living with some rancher. People talk, you know. They say all sorts of interesting things. It's not what you think, isn't it?" His smile widened. "You always were a whore at heart." I just didn't want to believe it. The word hit her like a slap. Around them, people were starting to notice, starting to watch. Henderson had appeared in his doorway. A woman across the street had stopped walking. "I'm not going back with you," Eliza said, trying to sound firm, trying to sound like she meant it. "You don't have a choice." "Yes, I do." Marcus's expression shifted. The charm dropped away, revealing something colder underneath. "You think you can just disappear? Start over? I told you, you're mine, Eliza. You'll always be mine. And I'm not leaving Red Hollow without you." He reached for her arm. Eliza jerked back, and her hand found the knife she'd started carrying in her apron pocket. Small, sharp, the one she'd kept under her pillow until she'd felt safe enough to move it. She didn't pull it out, just gripped it hard enough that her knuckles went white. Marcus saw the movement, and his eyes narrowed. "You gonna stab me, Eliza? In broad daylight? In front of all these witnesses? He glanced around at the growing audience. Go ahead. See what happens. I'm sure they'd love to hear about how you've been spreading your legs for some broken-down rancher while I've been worried sick about you. That's enough. The voice came from behind Marcus, deep, controlled, absolutely furious underneath. Rhett had appeared from somewhere, the saloon maybe, or just off the street, and now stood a few feet away. He wasn't holding a weapon, wasn't even in a fighting stance, just standing there, hands loose at his sides, every line of his body radiating barely contained violence. Marcus turned, assessed Rhett with the quick calculation of a man used to sizing up competition. You must be Calder. I've heard about you. Have you? Small-town gossip travels fast. They say you're washed up, that you used to be dangerous, but you've gone soft. Marcus smiled. I hope that's not true. Would hate to think Eliza's been wasting her time. Rhett didn't take the bait, just looked at Eliza. You all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. This your employer? Marcus asked her, though his eyes never left Rhett. The man you've been living with in sin? I have to say, Eliza, you could have done better. Leave, Rhett said quietly. Now, before this gets ugly. Or what? You'll throw me out of town? I have every right to be here, more right than some runaway whore and the man who's harboring her. The crowd was bigger now. Eliza could see faces in windows, people emerging from shops. Everyone loved a spectacle, especially one that confirmed their worst suspicions. Rhett took one step forward, just one. But something in the way he moved made Marcus instinctively step back. I'm going to explain this once, Rhett said, and his voice was different now. Not the careful, measured tone Eliza had grown used to. This was something older, harder, the voice of the man he used to be. That woman is under my protection. She works for me, lives on my land, and answers to no one but herself. You don't get to speak to her like that. You don't get to touch her. You don't even get to look at her unless she says it's all right. And if I don't leave, then I'll make you leave, and I won't be gentle about it. The threat hung in the air, real, credible. Everyone watching believed it. Marcus's smile tightened. Careful, Calder. Threats like that in front of witnesses? That's how men end up in jail. I don't make threats. I make promises. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Eliza held her breath, hand still gripping the knife in her pocket, waiting for the explosion. Then Marcus laughed and stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. All right, I can see when I'm not wanted. For now. He looked at Eliza. But this isn't over. You're mine, Eliza. You'll always be mine. And when your guard dog here isn't around, we'll finish this conversation. He walked away, heading toward a horse tied near the saloon, mounted it with casual ease. Before he rode off, he looked back one more time. I'll be around, Eliza. You can count on it. Then he was gone, disappearing down the main street toward wherever he was staying. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed the confrontation hadn't turned violent. But Eliza could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting already. By nightfall, everyone in Red Hollow would be talking about the woman living with Rhett Calder and the man who'd come to claim her. Rhett turned to her. We should go. I still have supplies to... Now, Eliza. His tone left no room for argument. She climbed into the wagon on shaking legs, barely aware of Henderson hurrying out with the last few items they'd forgotten. Rhett threw them in the back without checking what they were, then climbed up beside her and snapped the reins harder than necessary. They rode in absolute silence for the first 10 minutes. Eliza tried to think of what to say, how to explain, how to apologize for bringing her mess into his life. Finally, Rhett spoke. How long until he tries something? I don't know. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. He likes to make people wait, make them scared. He succeeds at that? Yes. Rhett was quiet for another minute. You should have told me he might find you. I thought I was far enough away. I thought... Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. I never meant to bring this to your door. You didn't bring anything. He did. Rhett's jaw was tight. But he made a mistake. What mistake? He threatened you in front of me. Made it clear he intends to keep threatening you. That changes things. What are you going to do? Rhett didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. What needs to be done? The way he said it made Eliza's stomach clench. Rhett, you can't... Can't what? Protect someone living under my roof? Can't keep a promise I made? You'll go to jail, or worse. Maybe. He glanced at her finally, and his eyes were hard. But he's not taking you. I meant what I said back there, every word. They pulled up to the ranch as the sun was starting to set. Rhett jumped down and started unhitching the horses with sharp, angry movements that spoke volumes. Eliza climbed down more slowly, her whole body feeling like it had turned to water. The fear she'd kept at bay in town was crashing over her now in waves. Marcus was here, had found her, was planning something, and she'd dragged Rhett into it without meaning to. Go inside, Rhett said, not looking at her. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Rhett? Just do it, Eliza, please. The please was what convinced her. She went inside, watched through the window as he finished with the horses, and then headed to the barn. When he came back out, he was carrying his rifle. He sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, and waited for dark to fall. Eliza stood at the window for a long time, watching his silhouette against the dying light, and finally understood what it meant for someone to choose to stand between you and danger. Not because you were weak, not because you owed them something, just because they'd decided you mattered. And that knowledge, that dangerous, terrifying knowledge, was the thing that finally made her cry. Not from fear of Marcus, but from the devastating realization that she'd started to care about what happened to the man sitting on that porch with a rifle, waiting for violence he'd promised himself he was done with. She'd started to care about Rhett Calder, and that made everything infinitely more complicated than it had been when she'd arrived in Red Hollow with a single suitcase and a heart that had sworn never to trust anyone again. Marcus didn't come that night, or the next. Rhett stayed on the porch until past midnight both times, rifle ready, watching the darkness for movement that never came. Eliza barely slept, lying in her locked room with the knife under her pillow again, listening to every sound the house made, every creak of wood settling, every whisper of wind against the windows. By the third day, the waiting had become its own kind of torture. Rhett was different now. The careful distance he'd maintained had collapsed into something more protective, more present. He stayed closer to the house, found reasons to check on her throughout the day. Every time a horse approached on the road, he moved to where he could see who it was, one hand always near the gun he'd started wearing on his hip again. The change in him was subtle but unmistakable. The man who'd been trying so hard to be gentle, to be careful, to be different than he used to be. That man was disappearing. In his place was something harder, more dangerous. Eliza watched it happen and felt responsible, felt like she'd dragged him backward into the violence he'd worked so hard to leave behind. On the fourth morning, she found him on the porch again, coffee gone cold in his hand, staring at the road like he could make Marcus appear through sheer force of will. You can't keep doing this, Eliza said from the doorway. Doing what? This, sitting out here all night, not sleeping, waiting for something that might not happen. Rhett didn't look at her. It's going to happen. Men like him don't make threats and then disappear. Maybe he left. Realized it wasn't worth it. You believe that? Eliza wanted to. But she knew Marcus better than that. He was playing a game, letting the fear build, making her imagine all the terrible things he might do. It was how he worked. Fear first, violence later, when she was too exhausted to fight back properly. She sat down on the porch step near Rhett's boots. When I was with him in Denver before I ran the first time, he used to do this, disappear for days after we'd fought. Let me think he'd given up, let me relax. Then he'd show up when I least expected it, always caught me off guard. So he's waiting for me to drop my guard. Yes. Then I won't. Eliza pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. You can't stay awake forever. I've gone longer without sleep. That's not the point. The point is... She stopped, struggling with how to say it. The point is, I don't want you becoming someone you're not because of me. You've worked so hard to change, to be better, and now I've brought this mess to your door and you're turning back into what I was. Rhett finally looked at her, and his expression was complicated. Not angry, not exactly. Eliza, I haven't changed as much as you think. That man I used to be? He's still here. I just keep him locked up most of the time. But when something threatens someone, He stopped himself. Someone under my protection. That lock doesn't hold so well. That's what scares me. It should. He set down his coffee cup. But here's the thing. The old me would have gone looking for him by now, would have ridden into town, found whatever hole he's hiding in, and beaten him half to death just for speaking to you that way. That's what the old me would have done. And now? Now I'm sitting on my own porch, drinking bad coffee, waiting for him to make the first move. That's different. Maybe not different enough, but it's something. Eliza studied his profile in the morning light. The tension in his jaw, the tired lines around his eyes, the way his hand kept drifting toward the gun on his hip like it was magnetic. I should leave, she said quietly. Go somewhere else. Then he'd follow me and you could go back to… No. Rhett, no. He turned to face her fully now. You're not leaving. You're not running again. This is your home now, whether you've figured that out yet or not. And I'll be damned if I let some entitled bastard chase you away from the first place you felt safe in years. How do you know I feel safe here? Because you stopped locking your door every night. Because you hum when you work. Because yesterday I found you sitting by the creek with your eyes closed, just listening to the water, and you didn't jump when I made noise on purpose so you'd know I was there. His voice softened. You feel safe here. Maybe for the first time in years. I'm not letting him take that away from you. Eliza felt something crack open in her chest. You noticed all that? I notice everything about you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was quite ready to examine. Rhett looked away first, clearing his throat. Point is, you're staying. We'll handle Marcus, together. How? I'm working on that part. Before Eliza could respond, they heard hoofbeats. Both of them tensed, Rhett's hand moving to his gun automatically. But it was just Henderson's delivery boy, bringing mail and supplies like he did every Thursday. The kid pulled up, looking nervous. Mr. Calder, Miss Hartwell, got your weekly delivery? Thanks, Billy. Rhett walked over to help unload the supplies, keeping himself between Billy and Eliza without making it obvious. Old instincts. Billy hesitated before climbing back on his horse. Mr. Calder, there's talk in town about that man who came looking for Miss Hartwell. People are saying he's been asking questions, offering money for information about her. What kind of information? Everything. Where she goes, what she does, when she's alone. Billy glanced at Eliza apologetically. My pa said to tell you, said you should know what he's up to. Your pa's a good man. Thank him for me. Billy nodded and rode off, kicking up dust in his hurry to leave. Rhett stood watching him go, his expression dark. He's building a map of your routine, figuring out the best time to approach you when I'm not around. So what do we do? Change the routine. You don't go anywhere alone. Not to the creek, not to check the animals, not even to the outhouse after dark. He looked at her seriously. I know you hate being watched over. I know it makes you feel trapped. But until we know what his plan is, I understand. And she did. This was survival, not control. There was a difference. They spent the day working closer to the house than usual. Rhett found repairs that needed doing on the porch, the shed, the fence line within shouting distance. Eliza baked bread and mended clothes and tried not to look at the road every 5 minutes. That evening, as they were finishing a mostly silent dinner, someone knocked on the door. They both froze. Rhett stood slowly, hand moving to his gun. Stay here. He moved to the door, positioned himself to the side where he couldn't be shot through the wood, and called out. Who is it? Sheriff Clayton. Need to talk to you, Calder. Rhett and Eliza exchanged a look. Then he opened the door partway, keeping his body blocking the entrance. Sheriff Clayton was a weathered man in his 60s, more politician than lawman at this point in his career. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. Evening, Rhett. Sorry to bother you so late. What do you want, Clayton? Had a visitor today, man named Marcus Thornton, filed a complaint against you. Says you threatened him in town, in front of witnesses. I told him to leave. That's not a threat, that's a request. He says it was the way you said it. Says you made him fear for his safety. Clayton shifted his weight. Look, I know the situation's complicated, know about his history with Miss Hartwell, but threatening people in the middle of town, that's something I got to address. He called her a whore. In public. While trying to grab her. Rhett's voice was flat. What was I supposed to do? Not threaten to make him leave in a way that sounded like violence. It was violence. I was very clear about that. Clayton sighed. Rhett, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm trying to keep this from escalating. If you just apologize, tell him you were out of line. I wasn't out of line, and I'm not apologizing for protecting someone. He's talking about pressing charges. Says he feels unsafe in town with you around. Good. He should feel unsafe. Maybe he'll leave. Or maybe you'll end up in jail. Clayton's tone hardened. I like you, Rhett. You've turned your life around, stayed out of trouble. But I can't ignore this. If he pushes it, I'll have to bring you in. Eliza stepped forward from where she'd been standing in the kitchen. Sheriff, Marcus Thornton has been stalking me for 2 years. He's the reason I left Denver, the reason I left Kansas City. Every time I thought I'd gotten away, he found me. He's dangerous. Clayton looked sympathetic but unmoved. Did he ever hurt you? Physically, I mean? Yes, multiple times. You ever report it? In Denver. They didn't believe me. His family has connections. Did you report it in Kansas City? Eliza hesitated. No. Then it's your word against his. And right now, what I got is a respectable businessman saying he came here to speak to his former fiancée. I was never his fiancée, and was threatened by a known violent man with a history of exactly this kind of behavior. Clayton looked at Rhett apologetically. I'm sorry, but that's what it looks like from where I'm standing. So what? Rhett's voice was dangerous now. You're taking his side? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm trying to keep the peace, which means both of you need to back down before someone gets hurt. He settled his hat back on his head. I'm asking you, as a favor, to stay away from him. Let him say his piece to Miss Hartwell if she's willing. Let him leave town peacefully. Don't give him a reason to push this. And if he's the one who escalates, then I'll handle it. But you gotta promise me you'll keep your temper in check. Can you do that? Rhett stared at him for a long moment. No. Clayton's expression hardened. Then I'll be back with a warrant. And Rhett? Don't make me regret giving you this warning first. He left, and Rhett shut the door with more force than necessary. He's already chosen sides, Eliza said quietly. Marcus probably paid him. Probably. Rhett paced the small space, his earlier control fraying. This is how it always works. Men with money and connections, they can say whatever they want, do whatever they want. Rest of us just have to take it. What are we going to do? I don't know yet. He stopped pacing and looked at her. But I meant what I told Clayton. I'm not backing down, even if it means jail. I won't let you go to jail for me. Might not be up to you. That night, neither of them slept. Eliza could hear Rhett moving around the house, checking doors and windows, the scrape of a chair being positioned where he could watch the road. She stayed in her room, but didn't lock the door. Somehow that felt important, not locking it, even now. A statement that she trusted him even when everything was falling apart. Around 2 a.m, she heard something outside. Not a person, just the wind picking up, carrying the scent of smoke. Smoke. She sat up fast, went to her window. In the distance, toward town, she could see an orange glow against the night sky. Fire. She threw on her dress and ran to the main room where Rhett was already at the window watching. That's coming from the Hendersons' place, he said. Or near it. You think it's related to... I don't think anything's a coincidence anymore. He grabbed his hat. I'm going to check it out. I'm coming with you. No. You're staying here where it's safe. Safe? Rhett, if this is Marcus trying to draw you away from the ranch so he can... She stopped because she'd just realized what this was. A diversion. Get Rhett away from the house. Leave her alone. Vulnerable. Rhett had reached the same conclusion. His jaw clenched. Damn it. They stood there, frozen by indecision. Go help with the fire and risk leaving Eliza exposed? Or stay and potentially let people die if it was a real emergency? The decision was made for them when they heard horses approaching, multiple riders, coming fast. Rhett moved Eliza behind him, hand on his gun, ready for whatever came next. But it wasn't Marcus. It was Burke and his men, the same 3 who'd harassed them weeks ago. Burke pulled up near the house, his horse wild-eyed and lathered. Calder, fire in town. Henderson's store is going up. Whole block might go. Need every man who can carry a bucket. Rhett hesitated only a second. I'm coming. Give me a minute. Don't have a minute. Place is burning fast. I said I'm coming. Now get out of here before I shoot you for being on my land at 2 a.m. Burke looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He and his men rode off toward town. Rhett turned to Eliza. Listen to me. You lock every door and window the second I leave. You take the rifle. It's loaded. You know how to use it. Anyone tries to get in who isn't me, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand? Rhett, this could be exactly what he wants. I know, but if I don't go and people die because I was too paranoid to help, I'll never forgive myself. And neither will anyone else in this town. He grabbed her shoulders, looked her dead in the eye. I'll be back as soon as I can. 2 hours, maybe 3. You can hold out that long. What if he comes? Then you shoot him. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. I mean it, Eliza. Don't hesitate. Don't warn him. Just shoot. She nodded, mouth dry. Rhett kissed her forehead, fast, almost unconscious, like he'd done it 1,000 times before, then grabbed his hat and was gone, riding hard toward town and the orange glow that was getting brighter. Eliza stood alone in the suddenly too quiet house and tried not to think about the fact that he'd just kissed her, that in a moment of crisis, his instinct had been to kiss her, like she mattered, like she was something precious that needed that kind of goodbye. She shook herself and got to work. Locked the front door, the back door, checked every window, found the rifle right where Rhett had said it would be, and checked the chamber. Loaded, ready. Then she positioned herself in the main room where she could see both doors and settled in to wait. The house was completely silent except for the sound of her own breathing. Minutes crawled past like hours. Every sound outside, wind, animals, the natural settling of the land at night, made her jump. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing happened. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe it really was just a fire. Maybe Marcus had nothing to do with it. Then she heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, not trying to be quiet. Someone knocked on the door. Eliza, it's me. Open up. Marcus's voice, calm, almost friendly. She gripped the rifle tighter and said nothing. I know you're in there. Saw Calder ride off toward town. Figured we could finally have that conversation without your watchdog around. He knocked again. Come on, Eliza. We used to be friends, remember? Before you got scared and ran away like a child. She stayed silent, barely breathing. I'm not going to hurt you. Just want to talk. 5 minutes. Then I'll leave and you'll never see me again, I promise. She knew what his promises were worth. Eliza. His tone changed, hardened. Open the door, now, or I'll assume you're not in there and I'll have to break in to check, and then things will get messier than they need to be. Her hands were shaking. She raised the rifle, aimed it at the door, tried to remember everything Rhett had taught her about shooting. I'm going to count to 10, Marcus said, and then I'm coming in, one way or another. He started counting. Eliza moved to position herself behind the heavy kitchen table, using it as cover. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands. 7, 8. She cocked the rifle. The sound was loud in the silent house. Marcus heard it, stopped counting. You really going to shoot me, Eliza? Through the door? That's murder. They'll hang you for that. You're trespassing, threatening to break in. That's self-defense. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Marcus laughed. There's the Eliza I remember. Always had more fight in you than you showed. It's one of the things I loved about you. You don't know what love is. Maybe not. But I know what ownership is. And you're mine, Eliza. You'll always be mine. No matter how far you run, no matter whose bed you climb into, get off this property now. Or what? Or I shoot you. Silence. Then Marcus's voice changed again, became something uglier. You shoot me and Calder goes to jail. Sheriff's already looking for a reason to lock him up. You give him one and your protector disappears for years. Then it'll just be you and me, like it always should have been. Eliza's mind raced. He was right. If she shot him, even in self-defense, Clayton would use it as ammunition against both of them. The respectable businessman killed by the violent rancher's woman. It would destroy Rhett. But if she didn't shoot and Marcus broke in, the door exploded inward, wood splintering around the lock. Marcus had kicked it open with brutal efficiency. He stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight, smiling. Hello, Eliza. She fired. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. But her hands were shaking and her aim was off. The bullet tore through the doorframe inches from Marcus's head. He didn't even flinch, just kept smiling. Missed. She tried to cock the rifle again, but her hands were shaking too badly. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and ripped the rifle out of her grip, tossed it aside like it weighed nothing. Now, he said, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise, we're going to have that conversation, and you're going to listen very carefully to what I have to say. Eliza fought, kicked, tried to scratch his face, but he was bigger and stronger and ready for her resistance. He shoved her against the wall, pinned her there with his body weight. I've spent 6 months tracking you down, he said, his breath hot against her face. Spent a fortune on investigators and bribes, all because you couldn't just accept that we belong together, that you're mine. I was never yours. You are. You just need to be reminded. His hand moved to her throat, not quite choking, but threatening it. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come back with me. We're going to leave Red Hollow tonight, before your rancher comes back. And you're going to forget this foolish attempt at independence and accept your place. I'd rather die. That can be arranged too. His grip tightened. But I'd prefer not to. I still have uses for you. Eliza's vision was starting to blur. She tried to reach for the knife in her apron pocket, but he had her arms pinned. This was it. This was how it ended. Exactly like she'd always feared, Marcus winning, taking her back, erasing everything she'd tried to build. Then she heard hoofbeats, fast, getting closer. Marcus heard them too. His grip loosened slightly. Your hero returning already? Fire must not have been as bad as I planned. The door, already broken, slammed open again. Rhett stood there, and the expression on his face was something Eliza had never seen before. Not anger, not even rage. Something colder, more absolute. He took in the scene in a single glance. Marcus pinning Eliza against the wall, her face red, the rifle on the floor, the splintered door. Get your hands off her, Rhett said quietly. Marcus smiled and didn't move. Or what, Calder? You going to shoot an unarmed man? In front of a witness? Sheriff would love that. I don't need a gun. Rhett crossed the room and grabbed Marcus by the collar, physically ripping him away from Eliza. Marcus tried to swing at him, but Rhett was faster. Years of brawling and surviving making his movements economical and devastating. He drove his fist into Marcus's stomach, then his face, then his stomach again. Marcus went down hard, tried to get up, and Rhett kicked him back down. Rhett, stop! Eliza's voice cut through the haze of violence. You'll kill him! Good. No, not good. She moved between them, hands on Rhett's chest, feeling his heart hammering. Not like this. Not because of me. Rhett stared down at Marcus, bleeding and gasping on the floor, and she could see him fighting with himself. The part that wanted to finish this, end the threat permanently, and the part that remembered who he'd been trying to become. The part that didn't want to disappoint her. Slowly, painfully, he stepped back. Get up, he told Marcus. Get on your horse and get out of Red Hollow. If I see you again, I won't stop. I don't care about jail. I don't care about anything except making sure you never touch her again. Marcus struggled to his feet, spitting blood. This isn't over. Yes, it is, because if you come back, I'll make sure they never find enough of you to identify. And I know how to make that happen. Rhett's voice was utterly calm, utterly serious. Test me if you want, but I promise you'll regret it. Something in his tone, maybe the absolute certainty, maybe the complete lack of bravado, finally got through to Marcus. He looked between Rhett and Eliza, seemed to calculate his odds, and didn't like what he came up with. You're both going to regret this, he muttered, but he was already backing toward the door. I regret not killing you when I had the chance, Rhett said. Don't give me another one. Marcus stumbled out into the night. A minute later, they heard a horse galloping away, heading toward town, toward wherever he'd been staying. Then they were alone in the destroyed house, breathing hard, both of them shaking from adrenaline and fear, and something else neither of them wanted to name. Eliza looked at Rhett, really looked at him. Blood on his knuckles, rage still radiating off him in waves, but his eyes, when they met hers, were full of fear. Not fear of Marcus. Fear of what might have happened if he'd been 5 minutes later. Are you all right? He asked hoarsely. Yes. You? I'll live. He reached up, touched her throat where Marcus's hands had been, and his expression went dark again. Did he? No. You got here in time. They stood there inches apart, something huge and unspoken hanging between them. The fire, Eliza finally said. Was it real? Yeah, took out Henderson's back storage room.
They got it under control pretty fast. I left as soon as I could, but he stopped. I shouldn't have left you alone. If anything had happened, but it didn't because you came back. I'll always come back. He said it with such certainty, such absolute conviction, that Eliza felt something break inside her. All the walls she'd built, all the defenses she'd maintained, all the promises she'd made herself about never trusting anyone again, they crumbled in the face of those 4 words. She stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. Rhett froze for half a second, surprised, then kissed her back just as fiercely, his hands coming up to frame her face like she was something precious he was afraid might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Eliza, Rhett started. Don't analyze it, don't question it, just... She looked at him, this man who'd turned his whole life around and was still willing to burn it down for her. Just stay. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time since Marcus had appeared in Red Hollow, Eliza believed something could actually work out. That maybe running wasn't the only option. That maybe standing your ground with the right person beside you could be enough. The broken door swung in the wind, letting in the cool night air. Tomorrow they'd have to fix it, board it up, make the house secure again. Tomorrow they'd have to deal with Sheriff Clayton and whatever consequences came from tonight. Tomorrow they'd have to figure out if Marcus was really gone or just regrouping. But tonight, just for tonight, they sat together on the floor of the ruined kitchen and held each other while the adrenaline wore off and something new took its place. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Dawn came too quickly and brought Sheriff Clayton with it. They'd spent what remained of the night trying to make the house secure, boarding up the broken door with planks Rhett pulled from the barn. Neither of them had slept. Neither of them had talked much about the kiss or what it meant. There would be time for that later, if there was a later. When Clayton rode up with 2 deputies, Rhett was outside inspecting the damage in the morning light. Eliza watched from the window, her stomach tight with dread. Calder, Clayton said, not bothering to dismount. Marcus Thornton says you assaulted him last night. Broke into where he was staying and attacked him unprovoked. He's got witnesses say they saw you leave the fire early, heard you making threats. Rhett looked up at the sheriff, his face carefully neutral. That's not how it happened. Then tell me how it did happen. He broke into my house, attacked Miss Hartwell. I defended her. That's self-defense, not assault. Got any proof? Witnesses? Just her. Clayton's expression said what he thought about that. His word against yours. And he's got a medical certificate from Doc Miller saying he's got broken ribs, a fractured jaw, bruises consistent with a severe beating, consistent with him trying to strangle a woman and getting stopped. You got marks on Miss Hartwell to prove that? Eliza stepped out onto the porch then, and Clayton saw the bruises on her throat, dark purple, clearly handprints. His expression shifted slightly. He did that? Yes, Eliza said. He broke in around 2 in the morning, pinned me against the wall, was choking me when Rhett came back from helping with the fire. And you can prove he broke in? That you didn't let him in? She pointed to the destroyed door frame, the splintered wood. Does that look like I let him in? Clayton studied it, chewing on something, tobacco or his own doubts. Thornton's saying you invited him here to talk. Says the broken door happened when Calder came back and attacked him in a jealous rage. That's a lie. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Problem is, I got a respectable businessman with documented injuries saying one thing, and a violent man with a history saying another. He looked at Rhett. I don't want to do this, but I gotta bring you in. Let the judge sort it out. The hell you do. Rhett's hand moved toward his gun. One of the deputies drew his weapon immediately. Don't, Calder. Everything froze. Eliza felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Rhett could draw, probably get Clayton or one of the deputies before they got him. But then he'd be dead or facing the noose, and Marcus would have won anyway. Rhett, Eliza said quietly. Don't. He looked at her, jaw clenched, every muscle in his body screaming to fight, but he slowly moved his hand away from the gun and raised both hands. Smart choice, Clayton said. Hand over the weapon, slow. Rhett unstrapped his gun belt and held it out. One of the deputies came forward cautiously and took it. You're making a mistake, Rhett said to Clayton. You're letting him manipulate you. Maybe, But I got a job to do. Clayton gestured to his deputies. Put him on a horse. They moved forward with rope to bind Rhett's hands. He didn't resist, but the look on his face was murderous. Eliza felt panic rising in her throat. How long? She asked Clayton. How long until the judge sees him? Circuit judge comes through next week. Till then, he stays in jail. A week? That's how it works, Miss Hartwell. Be grateful I'm not arresting you as an accomplice. He turned his horse. And if I were you, I'd convince Thornton to drop the charges. Because if this goes to trial, it's not going to end well for anyone. They rode off with Rhett between the two deputies, hands bound like a criminal. He looked back once, and Eliza saw everything he couldn't say written on his face. Don't do anything stupid. Stay safe. I'll come back. Then they disappeared down the road toward town, and Eliza was alone again. She stood on the porch of the half-broken house, watching dust settle on an empty road, and felt something harden inside her. Marcus had done this, had planned it perfectly. Attack her, let Rhett defend her, then use the law as a weapon. It was brilliant, vicious, exactly like him. But he'd made one mistake. He'd assumed she was still the scared woman who ran. The woman who let things happen to her because fighting back was too dangerous. She wasn't that woman anymore. Eliza went inside, washed her face, changed into her oldest dress. The one she'd arrived in, worn and patched but sturdy. She found the knife she'd carried for 3 years and put it in her pocket. Then she saddled one of the horses and rode into town. Red Hollow looked different in daylight after everything that had happened. The burned section of Henderson's store was still smoking slightly, people working to clear debris. Faces turned as she rode past, whispers following her like shadows. The woman living in sin with Rhett Calder. The woman who'd brought violence to their quiet town. Let them talk. She found Marcus at the boarding house, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, like he hadn't been beaten half to death 12 hours ago. He was bandaged, moving carefully, but he smiled when he saw her. Eliza, I wondered when you'd come. She dismounted and walked up the steps. Didn't sit, just stood there, looking down at him. Let him go. Marcus laughed, then winced because it hurt. Why would I do that? Because you got what you wanted. You proved you could reach me anywhere. You proved you could hurt me. You won. The words tasted like poison. So let him go and I'll come with you. His eyes sharpened. You're serious? Completely. She kept her voice flat, emotionless. You dropped the charges? Tell the sheriff it was all a misunderstanding. Get Rhett released. In exchange, I leave with you, today. No resistance. No more running. Marcus studied her face, looking for the lie. What's the catch? No catch. I'm tired of running, tired of fighting. You win, Marcus. You always win. I finally understand that. He stood slowly, moved closer. She didn't back away even though every instinct screamed at her to run. You'll come willingly? Do everything I say? Yes. And Calder, you won't try to contact him? Won't come back here? No. Marcus reached out and touched her cheek. She didn't flinch. I want to believe you, Eliza. I really do. But you've lied to me before. I'm not lying now. I'm just... She let her voice break slightly. I'm done. You've broken me. Congratulations. He studied her for another long moment, then smiled. That same charming smile that had fooled her once, years ago. All right, I'll talk to the sheriff this morning. We'll leave this afternoon. He leaned in close. But if you're lying, if this is some scheme you and Calder cooked up, I'll make sure he hangs. Understand? I understand. Good girl. He kissed her forehead, a mockery of the gesture Rhett had made the night before. I knew you'd see reason eventually. We're going to be so happy together. Eliza nodded and turned to leave before he could see her face. Oh, and Eliza, Marcus called after her. Don't bother saying goodbye to your rancher. Clean breaks are better. She didn't respond, just mounted her horse and rode back toward the ranch, her mind already working through what came next. Because she'd lied. She'd lied through her teeth, and Marcus had believed her because men like him always underestimated women like her. They saw broken, scared, defeated, and assumed that meant powerless. They were wrong. Back at the ranch, Eliza worked quickly. She went to Rhett's room the first time she'd entered it, and found what she was looking for in a locked drawer of his desk. The lock wasn't complicated. The knife worked well enough. Inside, papers, documents, letters, and beneath those, a journal, leather-bound, worn from use. She opened it carefully and started reading.
The entries were sporadic, sometimes months apart. Most were brief, practical notes about the ranch. But scattered throughout were longer entries, confessions, a record of the man Rhett had been and the man he was trying to become. One entry dated 3 years ago stopped her cold.
Catherine left today. Can't blame her. Looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize what I saw. Something mean. Something broken. Samuel says I need to leave town, get away from the fighting and drinking and all the things that make it worse. He's probably right. I'm becoming something I can't live with, something that deserves to be alone. Another, from 2 years ago, bought the ranch. Land's as broken as I am. Seems fitting. Maybe we can fix each other, or maybe we'll just die together. Either way, it's better than what I was doing. And then, from 3 months ago, right after she'd arrived, hired a housekeeper, woman named Eliza. Scared of everything, including me. Can't blame her for that either. But she's trying. Staying even though she's terrified. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves that courage. Eliza closed the journal, her throat tight. This was what Rhett protected. Not secrets of violence or darkness, just the raw, honest record of someone trying to be better than they were. She put it back carefully, relocked the drawer. Then she did something that terrified her more than facing Marcus ever had. She wrote her own letter, explaining everything, not asking for forgiveness, but explaining why, what she was about to do, what it meant. She left it on the kitchen table where Rhett would find it when he came back. If he came back. Then she waited. Marcus showed up at 3 o'clock with a wagon. Sheriff Clayton came with him, looking uncomfortable. He dropped the charges, Clayton said without preamble. Calder's free to go. Should be back here within the hour. Thank you, Eliza said. Miss Hartwell, Clayton hesitated. You sure about this? Going with him? Because if he's forcing you, he's not forcing me. Then you're a fool. He said it quietly, sadly. But it's your choice to make. He rode off, leaving Eliza alone with Marcus. Ready? Marcus asked, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. She took it. Let him help her up. Sat beside him as he took the reins. They rode toward town, toward the stage that would take them east, away from Red Hollow, away from everything she'd found here. Marcus was talking, making plans, describing the life they'd have together. She wasn't listening, just watching the landscape pass, memorizing it. The scrubby hills, the endless sky, the land that fought you for every scrap of life. She'd learned to love this harsh place, learned it was possible to put down roots even in hard soil. As they reached the edge of town, Eliza saw a rider coming from the opposite direction, fast, desperate, Rhett. He'd been released, had obviously ridden hard to get back to the ranch, must have found her letter. Now he was coming after her. Marcus saw him too and cursed. He snapped the reins, trying to make the wagon go faster, but Rhett was on horseback and gaining ground. Don't do this, Eliza, Marcus said tightly. Don't make me hurt him. She saw the gun in his coat pocket, saw his hand moving toward it. This was the moment, the choice point, the place where everything either broke or held together. Eliza made her choice. She grabbed the reins out of Marcus's hands and pulled hard, making the horses rear. The wagon tilted dangerously. Marcus grabbed for the seat to keep from falling, and in that moment, Eliza pulled the knife from her pocket and held it to his throat. Drive, she said calmly. Away from town, into the hills. Eliza, drive, or I open your throat right here and let you bleed out in front of everyone. He looked at her and finally, saw what he'd never seen before. Not a victim, not a possession. A woman who'd survived him once and would do it again. A woman who'd learned that running only worked if you knew when to stop and fight. Marcus drove. Away from town, away from witnesses, deeper into the empty land where no one would hear what happened next. Rhett followed at a distance, rifle across his saddle, ready but letting her take the lead. They went about 2 miles into the hills before Eliza told Marcus to stop. They were in a small canyon, rocks on 3 sides, the 4th open to the sky. Get down, she ordered. He climbed down slowly. She followed, keeping the knife ready. Rhett rode up and dismounted, moving to stand beside her. United front. Marcus looked between them and started laughing. Clever. You played me. Made me think you'd given up. I learned from you, Eliza said. You taught me that sometimes you have to lie to survive. Pretend to be weaker than you are. Make people underestimate you. And now what, you kill me out here? That makes you murderers. No, Eliza said. Now you make a choice.
She pulled out the papers she'd taken from Rhett's drawer. Documents. A deed to the ranch. And underneath those, something she'd found at the very bottom of that locked drawer. Letters Marcus had sent to sheriffs in 3 different towns, offering rewards for information about her whereabouts. Proof of his obsession, his stalking, his crimes.
These go to every sheriff between here and Denver, she said, along with my testimony about everything you did.
In writing, signed, witnessed. Even if something happens to me, even if you kill both of us right now, those letters are already mailed. They'll reach their destinations in a week. Marcus's face went pale. You're bluffing.
Am I? You want to test it?
She stepped closer. Or you could get on your horse right out of here and never contact me again, never look for me, never say my name. Disappear completely. And if I don't, then every lawman in 3 territories will know what you are. Your family's money won't protect you. Their connections won't matter. You'll be wanted, hunted. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder the way you made me look over mine. It was a bluff. Mostly. She'd written the letters but hadn't mailed them yet, hadn't had time. But Marcus didn't know that, and the doubt in his eyes said he couldn't afford to call her on it. You've changed, he said quietly. Yes, I have. That rancher did this to you, made you hard, mean. No, Eliza said. He showed me I was always capable of this. I just had to stop being afraid. Marcus looked at Rhett. You really think you can keep her? Keep her safe? I don't keep her, Rhett said. She's not property, but I'll stand beside her for as long as she wants me there. Something in Marcus's expression crumbled then, rage maybe at losing, or understanding that he'd never actually had her, not really, even when she'd been too scared to leave. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in it. Yes, Eliza said. It is. She lowered the knife, stepped back, gave him room to leave. For a moment, Marcus just stood there. Then he mounted his horse and rode off without another word, heading east, toward whatever life waited for him without her in it. They watched him disappear into the distance, watched until he was just a dot on the horizon, then nothing at all. Eliza's hands were shaking. The knife dropped from her grip. Rhett caught her as her legs gave out, held her while she finally let herself fall apart.
I was so scared, she whispered into his chest. I thought he'd killed you. Thought I'd lost you. I'm right here. Not going anywhere. The letters, I didn't actually mail them. I didn't have time. Doesn't matter. He believed it. That's enough. Rhett pulled back to look at her face. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, also the stupidest. You could have gotten yourself killed. So could you, coming after me like that.
Yeah, well, turns out I'm not very smart when it comes to you. They stood there in the empty canyon, holding each other, both of them shaking with relief and leftover fear and something that felt dangerously like joy. The letter you left, Rhett said after a while. You really thought you wouldn't see me again. I thought maybe you'd be better off without all my complications. I read your letter. Then I read it again. Then I wrote after you like my life depended on it. He touched her face gently, because it does. Depend on it. On you. I know that's probably too much too fast, but I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it. Feel what? That I love you, that I have for weeks, maybe since the first time you looked at me without being afraid. He swallowed hard. You don't have to say anything back. You don't owe me that. But I needed you to know. Eliza looked up at this man who'd changed his entire life to be worthy of someone's trust, who'd been willing to burn down everything he'd built to keep her safe, who loved her not despite her damage, but because he understood it. I love you too, she said. I'm terrified of it, but I do. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he'd been given permission to hold. She kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear, all the relief, all the desperate hope that maybe this could actually work. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. We should go home, Rhett said. Home. The word felt foreign and perfect at the same time.
They rode back to the ranch together as night fell, and for the first time in 3 years, Eliza didn't look over her shoulder, didn't calculate escape routes, didn't sleep with a knife under her pillow, because she was finally impossibly safe. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Nothing ever was. Sheriff Clayton remained suspicious for a while, until Marcus failed to show up for the scheduled hearing and word came that he'd left the territory entirely. The town gossips had a field day speculating about what had really happened, but Henderson and a few others defended Eliza publicly, and eventually the talk died down. The ranch itself demanded constant work. A fence collapsed in a windstorm. 3 cattle got sick and had to be nursed back to health. The roof developed a leak that took 2 days to fix properly, but they faced it together, working side by side, building something that looked a lot like a life. One morning in late October, Eliza woke to find Rhett already up, standing in the doorway of her room. His room now, too, though they'd moved slowly toward that, letting trust build naturally rather than forcing it. "What is it?" she asked. "Come outside. There's something you should see." She followed him, still in her nightdress, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. The wildflowers behind the shed had survived the first frost. They were scraggly, imperfect, fighting for life in soil that didn't want them, but they were still there, still blooming. "They made it through," Rhett said. "Thought they'd die when the cold hit, but they're tougher than they look." Eliza understood what he was really saying, what they both were. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there watching the sun rise over land that was learning to be gentle with them. "I have something for you," Rhett said after a while. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple, wood that had been carved and polished until it gleamed. No jewel, no gold, just something he'd made with his own hands from a tree that had survived the drought. "I know we haven't talked about this," he said, suddenly nervous. "And if it's too soon, if you need more time, that's fine. But I wanted you to have it anyway. Wanted you to know that I'm not going anywhere, that this—" He gestured between them, around them at the ranch. "This is what I want, for as long as you'll have me." Eliza took the ring, felt the weight of it in her palm, felt the weight of what he was offering. Not ownership, not control, just partnership. Just someone choosing to face life beside her instead of trying to direct it for her. "Yes," she said. "Yes? Yes. To all of it. To you. To this." She looked up at him. "To building something that lasts." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like he'd measured somehow without her knowing. They were married 3 weeks later by a traveling minister who didn't ask questions about their past, just observed what was obvious in the present. 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to rebuild together. Henderson gave Eliza away, having appointed himself her unlikely protector. A handful of people from town showed up, the ones who'd decided grace was more important than gossip. Even Burke came, standing awkwardly in the back, and afterward told Rhett quietly that he'd been wrong about him going soft. "Turns out strength looks different than I thought," Burke said. Rhett just nodded. They'd probably never be friends, but they could be neighbors. That was enough. The wedding was simple. No fancy dress, no elaborate ceremony. Just promises made in front of people who mattered, sealed with a kiss that felt like coming home. That night, lying in bed with Rhett's arm around her, Eliza stared at the ceiling and marveled at how far she'd come. From the terrified woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach with a single suitcase and a past she couldn't escape, to this, to safety that wasn't just absence of danger but presence of love, to a future that looked possible instead of impossible. "What are you thinking?" Rhett asked sleepily. "That I'm happy. Actually happy. I'd forgotten what that felt like." He pulled her closer. "Get used to it. I plan on making sure you feel it for a very long time." She believed him. Against all odds, despite everything she'd survived, she believed him. Because love, real love, wasn't about being saved. It was about finding someone who saw your broken pieces and said, "Me too," instead of running away. It was about building something together from whatever materials you had, even if those materials were damaged, even if the foundation was shaky, even if you had to rebuild it every single day. Winter came early that year, harsh and unforgiving, but they weathered it together, fed the animals in freezing temperatures, kept the house warm, told each other stories about their past that they'd never told anyone else. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, but it arrived.
The land began to green. The wildflowers that had survived winter bloomed again, stronger this time. Life insisted on continuing despite everything that tried to stop it. One morning in March, Eliza realized she hadn't thought about Marcus in weeks. He'd become background noise, a bad memory that was finally losing its power. She'd mailed the letters eventually, real ones this time, detailing everything, and heard nothing back. Either he'd heeded her warning or the law had caught up with him. Either way, he was gone from her life. She was free. Actually, truly free. And she'd use that freedom to choose Rhett, to choose the ranch, to choose a life that was hard and beautiful and completely her own. That afternoon, she found Rhett working on the fence line again. There was always something that needed fixing, and she stood watching him for a moment before he noticed her. When he did, he smiled. That same smile he'd given her when she'd first arrived, except now it reached his eyes. Now it was unguarded. "Need something?" he asked.
"No, just wanted to look at you." He laughed, embarrassed. "Why?" "Because I can. Because you're mine and I'm yours, and that still feels like a miracle." He set down his tools and walked over to her, pulled her close despite being dusty and sweaty from work. "Not a miracle," he said. "Just two people who got lucky, who found each other when they both needed finding. And now? Now we keep going, keep building, keep choosing each other." He kissed her forehead, every single day. That was the truth about healing, Eliza had learned. It wasn't a destination you reached. It was a choice you made repeatedly. To trust instead of doubt. To stay instead of run. To believe that you deserved good things even when your history suggested otherwise. Some days were harder than others. Sometimes Eliza still woke up gasping from nightmares about Marcus. Sometimes Rhett still struggled with the violence inside him that wanted easy answers. Sometimes they fought over stupid things because they were both damaged people learning how to be whole together. But they always came back to each other, always remembered what they'd built and why it mattered. Years passed. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, expanded the property, hired hands when they could afford it. Eliza learned to manage the finances, discovered she had a head for business. Rhett learned to delegate, to trust others, to not carry every burden himself. They had children eventually, 2 daughters who had their father's eyes and their mother's stubborn determination. Raised them on land that had gone from harsh to habitable, taught them that strength came in many forms, that home was what you built, not where you started. The town of Red Hollow changed too. New families arrived. Old grudges faded. Margaret Henderson eventually married a banker from Santa Fe and moved away. And if she was disappointed about not catching Rhett, she had the good sense not to show it. Through it all, Eliza and Rhett remained, constants in a changing landscape. Not perfect, never perfect, but present, committed. In love in a way that deepened rather than faded with time. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, and they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over land they'd learned to love, Eliza sometimes thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived. Scared, broken, convinced she'd never trust anyone again. That woman felt like a stranger now. "What are you smiling about?" Rhett asked, watching her face. "Just remembering. Good memories or bad?" "Both, but mostly good." He took her hand, the one that still wore the wooden ring he'd carved all those years ago. They'd gotten proper wedding bands later, but she'd never stopped wearing the first one. It mattered more. "I love you," he said. Simple, true, said the same way every day for years and somehow never becoming routine. "I love you too." The sky turned red and gold and purple as the sun disappeared. Night came on soft and cool. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to each other. The land breathed. Life continued. And Eliza Hartwell Calder, who'd once thought safety meant being alone, sat beside the man who'd taught her otherwise. The man who'd shown her that the bravest thing you could do wasn't running from fear. It was standing still long enough to let love catch up. They'd both been broken when they found each other. Shattered pieces that didn't seem like they'd ever fit together. But broken things, it turned out, had the sharpest edges. And if you were careful, if you were patient, if you were willing to bleed a little in the process of fitting together, those sharp edges could cut away everything that didn't matter, everything that wasn't real, leaving only what was essential: love, trust, home, the 3 things that made survival worth the effort.
The three things they'd built together from nothing but determination and hope. And that, Eliza thought, settling against Rhett's shoulder as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, was more than she'd ever dared to dream possible when she'd stepped off that stagecoach in Red Hollow with a single suitcase and a heart that had forgotten how to hope. She'd learned to hope again. They both had. And hope, paired with love, was the most dangerous and powerful thing in the world. Dangerous because it asked you to believe in something better. Powerful because sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, that belief became real.